Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My husband and I had been living in the city for years, but with a baby on the way, we decided it was time for a change. We wanted a place with a yard, friendly neighbors, and a safe environment to raise our child. After months of searching, we found what seemed like the perfect little house on a tree-lined street. At first, everything was great. We settled in, decorated the nursery, and even adopted an adorable corgi puppy to complete our growing family. But little did we know our dream of suburban bliss was about to be shattered by one neighbor from hell. One night when my husband took our puppy for a walk, I was inside resting my very pregnant self on the couch when I heard a commotion outside. Curious, I waddled to the window to see what was going on. I saw my husband trying to reassure our neighbor that our puppy was friendly. Our puppy had run over to the woman across the street, tail wagging and excited to meet someone new. But instead of the usual, how cute reaction most people have to our furball, this woman acted like she'd seen a monster. The woman screamed in terror and demanded that the puppy be taken away from her. She let out a blood-curdling shriek and bolted inside her house, slamming the door behind her. My husband looked bewildered, standing there with a leash in his hand. He shrugged and continued walking the puppy, probably thinking it was just a weird one-off incident. But oh no, it wasn't over. A few minutes later, the woman emerged from her house again, this time on a mission. My husband had circled back without the puppy, probably to try and smooth things over. Big mistake. The woman angrily accused my husband of letting a vicious beast attack her. My husband tried to apologize and explain that it was just a harmless puppy, but the woman wouldn't listen. She threatened to call the police and kept screaming and cursing at him until he gave up and came inside. We figured she was just having a bad day and hoped things would blow over. A few days later, I'm at home with our newborn, finally getting the little one to sleep after hours of fussing. Just as I lay her down in the crib, there's a loud knock at the door. I open it to find a humane officer standing there, looking all official. The officer explained that he was there about a complaint from our neighbor. He said that our neighbor claimed our dog had charged at her and she feared for her safety. He warned that if it happened again, he'd have to issue us a fine. I was so shocked that I actually laughed. I told the officer that there must be a misunderstanding, explaining that we only had a 7-pound corgi puppy that was about as threatening as a stuffed animal. The officer looked skeptical, but I invited him in to see for himself. When he saw our tiny furball snoozing in his bed, he had the decency to look embarrassed. He said he'd still need to file a report, but he could see what I meant. He advised us to try to keep the puppy under control. I nodded, biting my tongue to keep from saying what I really thought about our neighbor's ridiculous complaint. As soon as he left, I heard my baby start crying again. Thanks, Karen. Over the next few weeks, we realized this woman wasn't just targeting us. Our other neighbor, a nice guy who mowed the vacant lot next to Karen's house, started having run-ins with her too. Every time he'd get near her property line, she'd come storming out, screaming about trespassing and property damage. It got so bad that she actually called the police on him multiple times, though nothing ever came of it. I was getting fed up with this woman's antics. Then one day, while browsing online, I stumbled upon a website that promised sweet, glittery revenge. For a small fee, they'd send an anonymous glitter bomb Christmas card to anyone you chose. The idea of Karen opening her mail and getting a face full of sparkles was too good to pass up. I placed the order and waited. A month went by with no word from Karen, and I started to think maybe the website had just taken my money. But then, one afternoon, there was yet another knock at my door. This time, it was a police officer. The officer asked to come inside, and I agreed. But as soon as the door closed behind him, he burst out laughing. He apologized and explained that they had received a call about a glitter attack through the mail, which he found to be the funniest thing he'd ever heard of. I expressed my shock at the situation. The officer reassured me that I wasn't in any trouble, as it was completely legal. He just wanted to tell me that I had made his day with this incident. That's pretty much it. Oh, and our corgi? He's still the least terrifying animal on Earth. I've been through a lot in my 16 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that bus ride. Let me start by saying I was born without my right leg. It's just something I've had to deal with my whole life. I've got a pretty cool prosthetic now, and most days I don't even think about it much. But some days, like that day on the bus, it becomes impossible to ignore. I had been out running errands all morning. Usually my mom drives me around, but she was working late shifts at the hospital that week. So there I was, navigating public transport on my own. It's not my favorite thing, but I manage. By the time I got on that bus, my leg was aching something fierce. The socket was rubbing in all the wrong places, and I was looking forward to getting home and taking it off for a while. The bus was packed, but I managed to snag a seat near the back. I put in my earbuds, closed my eyes, and tried to ignore the throbbing in my leg. That's when I felt someone tap my shoulder. I looked up to see this lady glaring at me like I'd just insulted her grandma. The woman cleared her throat loudly to get my attention. I responded with a questioning sound. She then demanded that I get up from my seat. Confused, I refused. She insisted that I should stand up because she was a woman and I was a man. I explained that gender had nothing to do with it and that I wanted to sit down because I had been walking for a while. I apologized but stood my ground. The woman replied that she didn't care about my reasons. That's when I noticed the kid standing next to her. Couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. The woman then said she and her child wanted to sit there and told me to be a nice young man and stand up. I acknowledged her request but politely refused again, apologizing once more. She became angrier and exclaimed that she'd had enough. She reached down and grabbed my leg, my prosthetic leg, and she started pulling. I cried out in pain and asked her what she thought she was doing. She yelled at me to get down. The pain was intense. It felt like she was trying to rip my leg off, which I guess she kind of was. I could feel tears starting to form in my eyes. I pleaded with her to let go of me. She kept yanking on my leg, but then she must have realized something wasn't right. Her hand froze, and I saw her eyes go wide as she felt the hard plastic and metal under her fingers. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then she let go of my leg so fast you'd think it had burned her. Without a word, she grabbed her kid and bolted for the front of the bus. I was still in shock, trying to catch my breath and make sure my prosthetic was okay. That's when I heard a commotion from up front. I looked up just in time to see the woman trip over someone's bag in the aisle. She went down hard, face first onto the floor of the bus. There was a sickening crunch, and then she started wailing. Blood was gushing from her nose, and when she opened her mouth to scream, I could see a gap where one of her front teeth used to be. The bus driver pulled over, and someone called an ambulance. I just sat there, still trying to process what had happened. A couple of people came over to check on me, and I managed to explain about my prosthetic leg. They were pretty horrified when they realized what that woman had tried to do. When my stop came, I got off the bus as quickly as I could. The next day at school, my friends could hardly believe the story. Some of them laughed, others were outraged on my behalf. My best friend suggested we start a support group for survivors of public transport Karen attacks. We had a good laugh about that. So yeah, it was a wild bus ride, but I came out of it feeling pretty darn proud of myself. Back in high school, when I joined a band with some friends, we had this one guy who played second guitar. Let's call him the entitled friend. Even back then, he was always looking for ways to squeeze money out of people. He'd demand gas money for the shortest rides and try to sell overpriced beers at parties where everyone was supposed to bring their own drinks. After graduation, I went off to college while the rest of the band stayed in our hometown. I'd visit when I could, catching their shows and helping out. At one of these gigs, I noticed entitled friend chatting up this girl with red hair and a goth look. Little did I know she'd become the other half of this disaster story, the entitled mother. From what my friends told me later, their relationship was a train wreck from the start. Entitled friend developed a drinking problem, and entitled mother couldn't hold down a job to save her life. They'd fight constantly, mooching off entitled friend's parents by living in their basement rent-free. One day, surprise, surprise, entitled mother got pregnant. Things seemed okay for a bit, but once the baby arrived, it all went downhill. Entitled friend would blow money on booze and games instead of saving for the baby, assuming his parents would foot the bill. Meanwhile, entitled mother treated childcare like a game of hot potato. Then the real drama hit. Turns out entitled mother had been cheating on entitled friend for months, possibly even before the baby was born. When entitled friend found out, all hell broke loose. Next thing we know, there's a custody battle. Entitled friend's parents hired a lawyer and built a case against entitled mother. They had a laundry list of issues: no job, no high school diploma, a history of car accidents, drinking while pregnant, you name it. Entitled mother tried to fight back, bringing up entitled friend's substance abuse and spending habits, but her lawyer told her to give up. She didn't listen. The case went to court, and my friends ended up testifying. They didn't hold back, confirming every allegation and adding their own reasons why neither of them should be parents. It got so bad that Child Protective Services got involved. In the end, entitled friend got custody because he had a job as an exterminator and his parents' support. Entitled mother only got limited visitation rights. Now here's where things get even crazier. A few months after the custody battle, I ran into entitled friend at the grocery store. He had the baby with him, looking frazzled and sleep-deprived. Entitled friend greeted me asking how I'd been. I replied that I was doing all right and asked how he was managing with the baby. He admitted it was tough and complained about how expensive babies were, mentioning that his parents weren't helping out as much anymore. I acknowledged that kids were a big responsibility and suggested he consider budgeting or picking up extra work hours. Entitled friend scoffed at the idea of extra hours, saying he barely had time to sleep. Then, he asked if I could lend him some cash, noting that I seemed to be doing well for myself. Taken aback, I told him I wasn't in a position to do that. He got angry, insisting we were friends and that he needed help for his kids' diapers and formula. I apologized but suggested he look into assistance programs instead. Entitled friend's voice rose as he accused me of being like everyone else, unwilling to help him out. He even suggested I'd help entitled mother if she asked. I tried to calm him down, saying that wasn't true and suggesting we talk about it another time. As I attempted to leave, entitled friend grabbed my arm. He demanded that I give him money, saying he knew I had it, and that just $100 would make him leave me alone. I told him to let go and repeated my refusal. At this point, a store employee approached and asked if everything was okay. Entitled friend suddenly changed his tone, claiming we were just catching up. I contradicted him, explaining that he was harassing me for money and had grabbed me when I tried to leave. Entitled friend panicked, denying my claims and insisting we were friends. The employee told entitled friend he'd have to leave the store, as they didn't tolerate such behavior. Entitled friend yelled that it was unfair and that they couldn't kick him out because he had a baby with him. Security was called and entitled friend was escorted out, all while yelling about how unfair it was and how nobody understood his struggles. I later heard through mutual friends that this incident led to another CPS investigation. Entitled friend's parents finally stopped enabling him, and he was forced to shape up or risk losing custody of his child. It was a wake-up call he desperately needed. The entitled mother eventually got her act together, got a job, and started taking parenting classes. She's still not allowed full custody, but she's working towards being a better parent. When my uncle, aunt, and their 5 kids had to leave their house because of a massive cockroach infestation, my grandpa, being the kind soul he is, offered them his old house to stay in for a good price. The only condition was that they had to keep it well maintained since it was where he planned to spend his golden years. Things were fine for a while, but then my uncle decided not to pay the power bill. Instead of dealing with it like a normal person, he went full crazy and stole a transformer from an abandoned property to set up at my grandpa's house. When the city found out, my uncle packed up his family and whatever they could fit in their 2 cars and fled to another state. They moved in with some relatives in Texas, lived there for free for a year, and then came back to our state. This time they moved in with my grandma, my aunt's mom. Now, here's where things get even messier. My cousin, let's call her C, had 3 kids, all unplanned. The first one was okay, but with the second, they found meth in her system before giving birth. Child Protective Services got involved, and by the time the third kid came along, they found meth in the baby's system too. CPS wasn't messing around. They said C couldn't be in the same house as her kids at night because they were afraid she might run off with them. So my parents, being the good people they are, agreed to let my aunt bring C's kids to our house every night for a month. Fast forward a bit, and my grandma gets diagnosed with lung cancer. She was bedridden, losing weight, and getting weaker by the day. My parents and I planned to visit her, but life got busy, and we kept postponing it. Then my dad's sister passed away, which hit us all pretty hard. One weekend, we finally made it to Grandma's house. We were trying to encourage her to get up and move around more to keep her strength up. My mom's brother was there too, agreeing with everything we said. At one point, my grandma gave my mom some shorts, and my mom asked my dad to take them to the car. That's when all hell broke loose. My uncle stopped my dad on the porch steps and started going off on us. He accused us of thinking we were better than everyone else and called us pretentious jerks. When I tried to explain that we were just trying to help Grandma, my uncle scoffed and claimed we only came because my dad's sister had died. He said we didn't care about anyone but ourselves. Before we could even process what was happening, my uncle pulled out a taser and zapped my dad right in the gut. Thankfully, my dad's pretty tough, so it didn't take him down, but we were all shocked. Then my mom's brother came running out, joining in on the madness. He called us horrible people and threatened to get a gang to beat us up. We decided it was time to leave, but my mom, understandably furious, turned to my aunt. She told her that she'd need to find somewhere else for her and the kids to stay at night. My aunt protested, claiming they weren't part of this and shouldn't be punished for what the others did. The irony was that my aunt was the one who told my uncle we were bossing everyone around in the first place. On the drive home, my dad's phone kept buzzing with messages from my uncle. In his texts, he called my dad a coward and claimed he was following us at 90 miles per hour. He wasn't, of course. We called the police and showed them the messages. They suggested getting a restraining order, which my dad did for both my crazy uncle and entitled aunt. Since then, we haven't heard a peep from either of them, thank God. You can't choose your relatives, but you can choose how to deal with them. In our case, a restraining order seemed like the best way to go. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.